Hi, it's Dwyer. April 29th, 2025. GamblersAdvisory.com, a free site. BettingAngle.us, a free site. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, for me, just a little side uh, point here. Baseball has a lot of similarities with boxing, right? So understand, for me personally, I've seen some great pitchers, but the best pitcher I've seen is Greg Maddux, right? Greg Maddux could get you out on a changeup, right? It could be a 3-2 pitch. He had hitters guessing. He would change speeds on his fastball. They would have the radar gun on him, and you would notice that his fastball wasn't that fast, particularly later in his career, right? But he wasn't a 100 mile an hour fastball guy. The key was figuring out when he threw the fastball, at what speed he was throwing the fastball, and if he was throwing a fastball, because Maddux had different pitches. To me, boxing is the same way. So, today, you have a 5-star article from me, right? One of the tools I use, we all have different methods, right? One of the tools I use in figuring out fights is actually reading articles in which guys who I consider to be great interviews in the sport talk about being in the ring with different fighters and the differences between them. Now, Gvozdyk, Alexander Gvozdyk, right? Sometimes I call him Gvozdyk because I'm prone to mispronouncing names. The proper pronunciation is Gvozdyk. It's spelled Gvozdyk, right? He's the guy who ended the reign of Adonis Stevenson at light heavy. He flatly says that Adonis Stevenson, who got injured in that fight, is no longer fighting. But Gvozdyk, who's been in the ring with Beterbiev and who has sparred with Canelo, flatly says to this day that Adonis Stevenson is the hardest puncher he's faced. Right? Let me point out, too, Stevenson, unlike the other two guys, was a southpaw. Different set of angles. Right? Now, Gvozdyk is clear in saying Stevenson didn't throw his big punch enough to be the best fighter he's faced. It's clear he, believes that Beterbiev and Canelo are better than Stevenson, right? But understand what we call here one-punch power. That's what Stevenson had, right? And when Stevenson hit you with his hammer, you were finished. Well, let's talk about Gvozdyk's impressions of Beterbiev and Canelo. And this is important because, of course, Beterbiev has a third fight coming up against Dmitry Bivol, and Canelo is about to hop in the ring with a mad scientist, right? Terence Crawford, a guy who's a different fighter every fight, a guy who makes adjustments to mess with an opponent. In other words, put in baseball terms, if Crawford believes that you can't hit a curveball, that's all he's going to throw at you. Or at least, he's going to throw 90% curveballs, right? So, with an eye on both of those fights, let's look at this article. I'm going to read parts of it because it's singular, right? Gvozdyk's talking about sparring with Canelo. And he says, I was impressed by his power. By the way, before I go further, you know my take on Canelo. He's defensively blessed, and he's one of the hardest punchers in the sport, pound for pound. Right? That's who he is. But he has this pleasant-looking face. Even when he tries to act like a thug, he comes across as a nice guy thug. He's a pretty good interview. He's an ambassador for the sport. And so people don't realize that when they fight Canelo, they're really fighting someone who, can take them out. Right? Don't let the baby face fool you. Canelo's a hardcore puncher. So, Gvozdyk says, I was impressed by his power. This guy has some power, and I can tell you when you look at him, he looks like a small guy. Yeah, he's muscular, but you think you're going to spar with some small guy. But as soon as the bell rings, you feel his power in his fists. He hits pretty solid. Right? Gvozdyk, as the article on Boxing Scene notes, and I'm going to put a link to this because this is one of the best articles I've come across in months. I'm going to put a link to this in the comment section of this YouTube video. But he points out, the article notes, that Gvozdyk believes that Canelo packs a punch even by light heavyweight standards. That's the other wrinkle here. Gvozdyk's not a 168er. This is a guy who's a light heavyweight who's already fought Beterbiev at 175, who has sparred and fought David Benavidez as 175. Right? So as we talk about Canelo here, understand, we're not talking about whether Canelo is a puncher at 168, the weight class where he's about to fight Terence Crawford, assuming Canelo gets by William Skull. No, we're talking about Canelo, a puncher at 175 by a guy who beat Adonis Stevenson. A guy who was beating Arthur Beterbiev before he got stopped. A guy who went the distance with David Benavidez at 175. So, Gvozdyk continues, right? He feels Canelo packs a punch even by light heavyweight standards. So then Gvozdyk gives away the secret sauce on Canelo. Here's the direct quote. It's very hard to connect a hard punch on him. He slips, he moves his head. He is a very skilled fighter. I was impressed. Right, folks, as I say here, Canelo is defensively blessed. If you don't get that part of his game, you're missing at least, and I mean at least, half of Canelo's game. Right? Canelo fights Golovkin 3 times. Whoever you think won the fights, let's all recognize here that Canelo went the distance with Golovkin 3 times. Right? You see Canelo fights and you realize fighters can't hit him. I think Billy Joe Saunders is a better boxer than Canelo. Right? But Saunders couldn't find him early. Right? Canelo can stand in the pocket, short neck, knows how to roll his head. Right? On my Gambler's Advisory site, I have a link to a video of Canelo doing just that. Doesn't even have his hands up against Danny Jacobs. And Jacobs can't hit him flush. Then Canelo, of course, has you hesitant to set up shop in the pocket because he's a crisp counterpuncher and he's a hard puncher. Let me continue. And keep in mind, Gvozdyk is openly telling you that he was impressed by Canelo. So, here's the quote. I want people to think about this. He's asked about a comparison between Beterbiev, who stopped him, and Canelo. And Gvozdyk's quote is, they have different power. Beterbiev has this heavy power, and Canelo is more explosive power. The hardest hitter I've ever been in the ring with was Adonis Stevenson. But he wasn't the best guy that I fought. That was Beterbiev. But in terms of one-punch power, it was Stevenson. His shots were heavy and sharp. Beterbiev lacks acceleration. Let me repeat that. This is why Beterbiev has a problem with Bivol, with boxers, right? Beterbiev lacks acceleration. You see his punches, maybe they are a little predictable. They are super heavy. Canelo, I think his punches are crisp. This is what I believe is going to sink Terence Crawford. Right? Canelo's punches are crisp. The thing about Beterbiev, all of his punches are equally heavy. His jab, his left hook. If he throws 4 punches, all 4 punches are equally heavy. Because again, this is just his natural power. On the other hand, Canelo is more explosive. He throws those frisbee left hooks, right hooks, but usually it's one punch. And if I were to evaluate one punch, I think the one that Canelo hits with are more effective. Right? So let me just say this diplomatically. Crawford, I believe, sees exactly this and thinks that he can counter Canelo. He might also think that Canelo has gotten to be a little bit left hook heavy. So the idea is, okay, I'm going to look out for Canelo's left hook. Keep in mind, Crawford, ambidextrous. Right? Whatever stance he needs is the stance he'll use to try to neutralize Canelo's left hook. If Canelo throws it, Crawford, I believe, thinks that he'll have a couple seconds of opportunity to counter and hurt Canelo. Right now, the problem I have with that is that 1, Crawford has knocked out no one above 147. 2, Canelo's defensively blessed. Right? He might not be able to hurt you after throwing a left hook. It might be the kind of thing where he throws his fastball and needs a second to recoup. Right? There's the other problem too, that Canelo, when he's throwing punches, as Gvozdyk says, the punches are crisp. In other words, Canelo can throw 95 or more. His left hook is here trigger. Right? Also, even when you try to counter Canelo, defensively blessed guys think about their defense before everyone else does. Right? Canelo is going to have the body lean and everything like that. I noticed against Golovkin, he would throw home run shots and then would take a couple of steps out of the frame. In other words, he wasn't there to get countered by Golovkin. Right? It looks like he's just following through on a big shot. Folks, that's by design. Right? He'd throw the big right hand, then he would be too far off at the side for Golovkin to hit him. right? Another problem Crawford faces is that Canelo right now is the king of Las Vegas. Las Vegas has had different kings. Oscar de la Hoya was the king for a period. Floyd Mayweather was the king in Vegas for a period, right? The Canelo Crawford fight's taking place in Las Vegas, not Saudi Arabia, not someplace neutral like the United Kingdom, right? It's taking place in Canelo's house. It's worse than that. The fights are for Canelo's titles, right? So the judges who love Canelo in Vegas, and who, whether you think Canelo lands punches or not, and understand, according to Gvozdyk, Canelo's punch is on par with Beterbiev's. In fact, it's crisper than Beterbiev's. It's more sudden than Beterbiev's, right? Whether or not you believe Canelo lands punches, and Crawford can be excellent defensively, right? Just understand Canelo's defense and the fact that it's his titles, in other words, he's the incumbent, is going to shade a lot of rounds toward Canelo, right? Crawford is going to wait for his opportunity. It's going to be a 1 to 2 second opportunity. He's going to jump in the pocket if Canelo dodges the shots, right? And Canelo, of course, is accustomed to getting hit by 168 pounders. Crawford's not, right? If Canelo dodges the shots, Crawford's going to have problems. Let me also say, too, that I talk about Canelo's left hook. Canelo is very two-handed. He's extremely two-handed, right? He has a right hand. Could you imagine waiting for your 1 to 2 second opening? Canelo throws a big left hook. You jump in. You're ready to land on him. He slips the punch. You're in the pocket with one of the biggest punchers in the heavyweight division. That's subliminal. That's the kind of punch, in my opinion, Canelo has, right? You're in the ring with one of the hardest 168-pound punchers there is, the guy who beat Adonis Stevenson is telling you hits like a light heavyweight, right? So let me say, one of the problems Beterbiev has is he's throwing fastballs every pitch. In other words, all of his punches have the same level of power. Boxers are the ones who then know exactly what's coming and who will keep him moving, right? You see the back foot Bivol is showcasing when he fights Beterbiev. With Canelo, it's more chess, right? Let's say it's early in the fight and I get hit with a punch and I think to myself, oh, I can take Canelo's punch, right? How do I know that that punch isn't Canelo's changeup? I mean, it's like facing Greg Maddux, right? You see the pitch, you say, okay, let me time this. I can time this for a counter. But then the problem is the guy's mixing it up, right? He's actually throwing stuff at different speeds. He's throwing stuff at different angles. You heard Gvozdyk talk about Canelo's frisbee left hook, right? He's throwing punches at different angles. He can shorten his punches. That's what you get when you're talking about one of boxing's best, right? So this is a great article. If there's a takeaway, it's the idea that different guys can hit hard, but just like in baseball, where some guys throw hard, but the ball has movement, right? There's an all-star game where John Kruk is in the batter's box and Randy Johnson throws a pitch over his head. And understand, Kruk, because he's facing a guy throwing awfully hard, as the ball is on the way, you don't know where it's going, right? It could hit you in the head. In other words, you only have a millisecond to make a decision. Where's this ball going? Is this guy trying to bean me, right? Johnson made sure it was over his head. But how confident are you standing in the batter's box after that pitch? Right? You realize, wow, I don't know where this guy's ball's going. Right? Just like in baseball, there are guys who throw hard, but then there's that special group, guys who throw hard with movement. I would say, because all of his punches are hard, Beterbiev is the guy who throws hard without the movement. Right? You can take away his punch selection by moving your feet and, making the pocket a mobile pocket. You really can't do that with Canelo, because Canelo is mixing up punch intensity. And of course, Canelo is much better defensively than Beterbiev. Right? Also, you've heard Canelo say, David Benavidez is too big for me. Now, folks, these comments here in this Gvozdyk article are from a guy who went the distance with Benavidez. In fact, the guy who sparred with Benavidez. The next time Boxing Scene interviews Gvozdyk, please, interviewer, mention Benavidez. Right? The point is that Canelo is an outsized puncher, whether you're talking 168 or 175. Right? And I will say this diplomatically. Benavidez, and I'm a big Benavidez fan, but Benavidez is going to have a much harder time finding Canelo than Canelo is going to have finding Benavidez. Now, I actually believe Benavidez wins that fight because Benavidez is not who you think he is. Right? Benavidez, believe it or not, has the faster hand speed, and it's sustained when he wants. Has the faster hand speed than Canelo. But Benavidez drives around in third gear. Right? Also, Canelo, we look at Benavidez and we see Benavidez gain weight, and Benavidez isn't as chiseled as Canelo. But you notice Canelo has taken rounds off later in fights. You notice John Ryder gets back in the fight, doesn't he? The third Golovkin fight. Golovkin gets back in the fight, doesn't he? Right? You notice Canelo has guys who are clearly ready to go. Right? Edgar Berlanga is outgunned. Right? Jaime Munguia, he drops Jaime Munguia relatively early in that fight. But you notice Canelo is the guy who is comfortable winning by decision. Right? Now I'll say, Benavidez, look at the second half of the Morrell fight. Right? Benavidez is a guy who is prepared to go 12 hard rounds. Look at the second half of the Caleb Plant fight. Right? Understand, Benavidez needed those rounds. Plant opened up a lead on him, and Benavidez was ready to go 12 rounds. Right? You can't go by how guys look. I can't look at a guy and say, oh, he has some baby fat on him. The late rounds are going to be unkind to him. That's not the way it works. Right? I'm from the Larry Holmes era. You had to be ready to go 12 rounds against Larry Holmes or you were finished. Holmes himself started, during a different era, right? The 15-round era, right? You don't understand the Thriller in Manila unless you understand that at the end of the 12th round, Ali and Frazier thought they had 3 more rounds to go. As it was, that fight goes 14 rounds. Right? Canelo, at this stage of his career, needs to take rounds off. If Crawford, who's unproven at 168, folks, he has not fought at 160. If it's a close fight and Crawford is vigilant and can take advantage of the rounds that Canelo needs to take off, then maybe he has a chance. Right? But I would still say the betting side of the play in that fight is the favorite, Saul Alvarez. Those are my thoughts. Again, I'll leave a link to this great piece. An excellent fighter, one of the more underrated fighters, right? His problem is that he's fighting the Adonis Stevensons of the world. He beat him. The Arthur Beterbievs of the world lost to him. The David Benavideses of the world, right? This is a world-class guy. He just got beat by a couple of other world-class guys. This is one of the more underrated fighters in boxing, right? Also, he's an older fighter, but he's in great shape. He's well preserved, right? Talking about Beterbiev and Canelo and comparing the two. This article's priceless. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Let me say this too. Don't let knockouts cause amnesia, right? You know, people see Canelo, he, hits hard and stuff like that. They completely ignore the defensive side of his game, right? Gvozdyk does not, right? As you look at Canelo fights, ask yourself, how many times has he been hit hard in the head? Keep in mind, he's fighting knockout punchers, right? Golovkin, Berlanga, Jaime Munguia, right, folks? Canelo hardly ever gets hit flush in the head. Think about that. It's crazy, and because he is shorter, he knows how to hide his body. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.